Whoops, I didn't mean to start recording and I didn't. Let's see. Hold it. And we didn't record anything other than, well.
Everybody to
Lord MEHER, we're going to start at the bottom of page 1295 in the online version.
Yeah, and it's a happy Diwali and New Year today. So wishing everyone a happy Diwali and New Year. I'm going to read now. It's absolutely impossible for an ordinary man to understand work with my universal mind. I work on an unlimited scale for the universe. To understand what I do is not within the bounds of human intellect. I always work for the universe and not for myself. Why would I need to work for myself? I do my work through various mediums. With that object in mind, I visit places, see different sites, or go to plays, films, and do 101 other things. But I don't enjoy movies or the theater as you do. I make them the medium of my inner spiritual work. My every breath does this work constantly, while or outwardly you find me doing nothing special. You cannot grasp this, the internal mystery. I have to do great work for the welfare of humanity. It is a universal duty. Times are critical, and due to certain crises, my responsibility has increased in proportion to the circumstances, prevailing conditions. I am the emperor of the spiritual kingdom, and every second receive inner reports and messages from every corner of the universe. Because of the troublesome time we are facing, I am inwardly receiving only distressing reports, such as the conflict between China and Japan. Next page, please. Thank you. So,
You see the page, Mama?
yeah, it just disappeared for a second. Just one moment. It's just, sorry. Yeah, I can, now I see it. Such news pours in every moment, and I have to issue inner instructions to my agents. You cannot see this outwardly as I simultaneously manage an infinite number of things inwardly, unknown to anyone. However, the effect of my work does appear outwardly. For example, when you find me suddenly and quite abruptly in a bad mood, one moment I look happy in a jolly mood, the very next you find me serious, moody, and morose. All this depends on the reports I receive, and I have to plan my work according to them. Suppose I am quite happily having tea with you all, and at that moment I'm inwardly informed that someone in India is passing through a great crisis. At that time, naturally, I send out a message in reply how to cope with or remedy the situation. And while doing that, my mood will change so that I will appear absent from my present surroundings. You will have 1,001 thoughts at the sudden change in me, but it is your ignorance which prevents you from either understanding the nature of my work or the cause of the change in my mood. You will be pained at my behavior and pondering it. Thousands of thoughts will pass through your mind in a second, but all this is beyond intellect, and you will never be able to follow it with the help of an inquisitive or arguing mind. On Sunday, 18th October 1931, Baba took the group by train on a trip to the Italian Alps at Varese. They changed to a mountain funicular and went up the steep gradient, enjoying the marvelous scenery. After returning to the city that evening, they went to the Odeon Theatre where they saw either a play, film, or an Italian opera. 2 days later, they drove to Lake Como for a short, pleasant stay. On 23rd, Baba received a telegram from Malcolm and Jane scholars in
Schloss.
sorry
Schloss. Malcolm and Jean Schloss.
in Harmon, where they had gone to stay on 19th October, informing him all arrangements had been made for his arrival in America. Baba had been speaking to Meredith about America and the role Meredith would play there in Baba's work. Baba repeatedly and forcefully told him, in America, you will have no rest at all. You will have to move about and work as I do very quickly. There is much to do there. Watch how I work wonders there. Meredith was found Meredith was fond of fruits and would often try to induce Baba to eat them. But Baba commented, neither I nor Baba Jan, Upasan Maharaj, or Sai Baba like fruit. Ramakrishna never touched it. Meredith asked him, maybe already have the best qualities in themselves, which are in fruits, so they eat, do not need to eat them. Isn't it like that? Yes, Baba replied, but added that fruits were healthful and good for the blood. On 25th October, after a tea party at Enid's apartment in Pensione Agostini in the afternoon, Baba and his companions left Milan on the 6:40 train. The group arrived in 2 hours Genoa after 2 hours and stayed at the Melino Terminus Hotel. In an attempt to feel important, Murdat would tell officials and the hotel staff that Meher Baba was his friend and Chanji and Aga all were his personal servants. Murdat's behavior was a headache to Baba because Meredith was unnecessarily telling people about Baba when Baba wished to remain incognito. Consequently, Chanji was harassed with many inquiries from the curious. Nevertheless, Baba tolerated Meredith's behavior as he wished to use Meredith for his own purposes. Through Meredith's communication, certain key persons in England had become in Baba's contact, but that work was now almost complete. However, until it was finished, Meredith's presence was necessary and tolerated. Another tea reception was held in Baba's honor on the afternoon of 26th October, where Baba met a few sincere and loving local devotees. One man named Douglas resembled Padri Baba remarked. Coincidentally, it's 25th October in India today. Baba, Meredith, Ali, and Chanji boarded the SS Roma at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, 27th October 1931, bound for New York City. The cabins they were given 400 and 421 were cramped and uncomfortable. But the next day, after leaving Naples, they were shifted to two outward facing spacious cabins, 272 and 274. Meredith introduced a young woman from Toronto named Louise Sky to Baba. Louise was quite taken with Baba and visited his cabin several times. Besides Meredith's annoying behavior, at times during this journey, Aga Ali would also behave like a spoiled child. One night, Ali lost his temper and created a disturbance in Baba's cabin, whereupon Baba soundly thrashed Chanji. Seeing Chanji being beaten, frightened, Ali and the boy realized his mistake. Even though Ali expressed his regret and apologized, Chanji continued to weep. Within moments of this incident, Luis appeared on the scene. Next person, please.
You want to
Marvin,
go?
read.
Okay, I'll read. The West learns to sing. Finding Chanji shedding tears, she was surprised and asked Baba the reason. Baba slyly spelled out, "Look what love Chanji has for me. Whenever he finds me alone, he cannot prevent himself from crying. His longing is terrible, so he sheds tears of love. These are his tears of longing." This statement greatly impressed Miss Skay, who then also began crying. Baba directed Chanji to calm the woman. How could she know the facts behind poor Chanji's beating? Chanji's heart was frightened of love. After leaving England, Chanji kept the close ones in London informed of the master's activities, and his letters were greatly appreciated. They served to keep Baba close to them during their pain of separation. On 10 October, Kitty wrote in reply to one of Chanji's letters, quote, "Life goes on as usual, truly, but not in the usual way. All is somehow different. All is for Baba now, be it work, play, rest, or sleep." And Kitty had indeed begun to surrender all to Baba, as evidenced by this message written on 27 October 1931. Dearest and beloved Baba, yes, it is wonderful, our love for you, but who is it that has given us the power to love so deeply? Is it not a divine gift from you to us, Baba? Make us more and more worthy of it. Even in this short while, there seems no minute of the day where the urge to dwell on you and to love you more and more perfectly is not present. I thank you always, always for the greatest of all God's gifts, himself to love and serve. Kim had also been deeply affected by meeting Baba. She wrote to Chanji on the 29th of October, "How can we ever thank you enough for the beautiful letter you wrote to Kitty and Kim and company? I can only say thank you, dear Chanji, again and again, and tell you that our tears of mingled joy and sorrow fell upon your letter as we read it. Tears of joy for the great blessing that had come to us through the infinite compassion of our beloved Baba, and tears of sorrow because we are not worthy of so great a happiness that our love for him is so weak, and that our love for him is so weak. We can only pray that we may be allowed to love him more, that the fire of his love may burn up all that is ourselves, so that at last nothing but Baba may remain. How ardently we long to be one with our beloved." On 30 October, Kitty sent Baba a letter asking if she and Zilla could meet him in Paris on his return from China in December. Kitty knew she belonged to Baba, and the effect of his love can be seen by what she wrote. Darling Baba, your love makes me just so happy all day, at work or rest. All work is now done for you. The results of that work are yours, as well as heart, mind, and will. All is held only in trust for you, to be given back to you or used in your service, whenever you have need of them. Can love ever be passive? It seems to want to give, 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 to lose all at the feet of the Master. Goodbye for now, with all the love you have already awakened and all that is latent. Meanwhile, aboard the ship, Baba went up for daily walks on the deck and sometimes attended the musical and cinema programs in the evening. The other passengers were curious to who he was and asked a boy named Emilio, to whom Baba had given his contact. The lad answered in broken English, a great and famous man. On Tuesday, 3 November 1931, one of the few persons Baba met privately with was a mild-mannered Italian professor of economics who had been invited to lecture in America. The professor came to meet Baba in his cabin. Baba was pleased with the man, who was not only very clever, but who had a good heart as well. At the end of their conversation, Baba advised him, be in the world, but not of it. Continue performing your duties, but do not be engulfed in the clutches of Maya. Never worry, and always try to be cheerful in spite of difficulties. Even in the face of calamities, remain happy. Baba instructed him to meditate daily on truth for 5 minutes and assured him that he would help him inwardly. Again, on the 4th, Baba's work necessitated his scolding of Chanji. There was a gala dinner that night and a fancy dress ball, which Baba, Ali, Meredith, and Chanji attended. But Baba became irritated over something and abruptly left and returned to his cabin, followed by Chanji. Baba had predicted a storm during the voyage, but little did Chanji realize what he meant. As he noted in his diary, what a pitiable plight of the poor occupants of Baba's cabin. Terrible to the extreme. One would prefer the real storm of the sea and the consequent seasickness and giddiness to this terrible storm of words and temperaments as experienced in his cabin. Swami Vivekananda can be said to have done the first spiritual spade work in the West. When he established his American headquarters in New York City in 1895, just a year after Meher Baba was born, Vivekananda referred to New York as the head, hand, and purse of the country. As one author put it, this great sophisticated polyglot metropolis was indeed a wellspring of new ideas. It was creative and enterprising. It was the center of all the arts. It was rich, generous, and throbbing with vitality. Everything was there. On Friday, 6 November 1931, the Roma passed the Statue of Liberty and sailed into New York City Harbor at 2 in the afternoon, docking at the West 57th Street Pier. But 2 hours passed before Baba and the men were allowed to disembark. An insolent immigration officer kicked up a row on board ship, unnecessarily delaying their disembarkation. He was dissatisfied with the answers given by Meredith to his questions and suspected something suspicious about Baba's silence and alphabet board. He kept detaining Baba and the group with questions and even tried to read the board himself, but could not. He asked Baba directly, have you come to teach people in America without speaking with this board? How foolish. Who gave you this silly idea? Baba spelled out in reply, I have come not to teach, but to awaken. In reply, the man laughed loudly, and Baba remarked to Chanji, he laughs at this now, but I will show him. Poor ignorant soul, I pity him. The officer then warned them, I cannot let you pass unless someone in New York stands surety for you. Baba's trip to America had not been widely publicized, and not many knew of Baba's coming, except for 3 persons waiting for Baba at the dock who were prevented from boarding the ship. There was no one present to intervene on Baba's behalf. It was an awkward situation, but it was the master's game. Baba remained serene and calm as he meekly submitted to the interrogation by the insulting immigration agent. Suddenly, an officer of the ship dressed in white appeared on the scene and asked the immigration agent, why do you detain these men when all the other passengers have left the ship? I guess it's time for the next reader. Gene, you want to continue here?
He explained that he was not satisfied with their travel documents and wanted surety. The ship's officer looked through the papers and asked, what is wrong with them? Let them go. But there is no one here to stand guarantee for them, the agent protested. Chanji explained that they had very good references, and the officer said to the agent, quite frankly, I do not see any sense in your behavior. They even have references to show. If you still need a guarantor, I will stand guarantee. I am coming back shortly and want you to prepare permits for them to land. This reprimand upset the immigration agent, but he issued the landing cards. When Chanji went to thank the ship's officer, he could not find him. No one knew who he was. It was the master's proof to the scoffing American of the force behind his alphabet board. Malcolm Schloss met the group at the pier. Baba was wearing an olive green felt hat that concealed his hair as he came down the gangplank, with a gray-green trench coat over his white sadra. Malcolm ruefully remembers his first meeting with the avatar of the age as he stepped onto American soil. I had seen a picture of Meher Baba, but I did not recognize him at first, nor was Meher the star prompt to introduce us. But when Baba, with his large, luminous brown eyes, smiled at me and held out his hand, instantly I knew who he was. My own hand went out hesitantly. I had read the story of Sri Ramakrishna's first meeting with Vivekananda. According to the report, the master Ramakrishna touched his visitor's knee with his foot. At that moment, the room reeled and disappeared, and Vivekananda lost all consciousness except the bliss of union. I also wanted the bliss of union, God knows, but the dock did not exactly seem the right place to experience that bliss. Baba thought likewise, apparently, for nothing extraordinary happened. I was half relieved, half disappointed. Smiling, Baba gestured. Malcolm has a good heart. Malcolm had brought 2 cars with him, one driven by Catherine Gardner and the other by Lillian Wardall. They drove out of New York City, 40 miles north along the Hudson River, to a small town called Harmon. There, arrangements had been made for Baba's stay. The group arrived at the house at 5:30 p.m. Malcolm Schloss, 37, was a poet and an ardent seeker of truth. He owned the North Node bookshop in New York City, which specialized in spiritual literature. You'll have to read the note, Marvin, because it doesn't appear on my screen.
Oh, didn't realize I was muted. Okay. The term North Node carries astrological significance and refers to a position of the moon. In general, the North Node is viewed as a point of opportunity for growth, development, and self-help.
The bookshop would often host lectures and sponsor courses of instruction by recognized authorities on spiritual subjects. His wife, Jean, 38, was likewise a sincere spiritual seeker. A journalist, she was working as assistant editor of a magazine in Manhattan.
Another footnote, Jean's given surname was Robinson, but she was known as Jean Weir at the time from a previous marriage. She later changed her surname to Adrielle based on numerology, perhaps.
Richard Isaac Meher of Boston was the first person to mention Meher Baba to Malcolm at the bookshop in the winter of 1930. Meher, 59, was a German immigrant cotton merchant and a lifelong bachelor. He told Malcolm about Meredith Starr and the Devonshire retreat and left him a copy of a letter describing life at the meditation ashram. He also sent Meredith a book of Malcolm's poems, and Meredith sent Malcolm his own poems. In May of 1931, Malcolm saw Richard Meher again in Boston. He also met Thomas Watson, who, along with Meher, was planning on sailing for England, where he was to tour as a Shakespearean actor. Watson, too, desired to spend some time at Meredith's retreat. In June, Malcolm and Jean sold their bookshop and moved to Hancock, New Hampshire, to live communally with a group of like-minded theosophical spiritual aspirants from Boston. In July, their friend, the well-known author Mary Anton, called, saying Milo Shattuck had come back from England. Watson had instructed Shattuck to contact Mary Anton, who was a close personal friend. Shattuck had not yet met Baba, but had heard about him from Meredith. Malcolm and Jean were deeply impressed. Shattuck returned to Hancock a second time to talk to them and the others, including Dane Rudyard. He was a famous astrologer, right? Catherine Gardner and Max and Lillian Wardall, all theosophists, about Baba. It was then that Jean and Malcolm decided to visit the Devonshire retreat. But plans changed when they received a cable of Baba's imminent arrival. With the funds they had collected for their trip, and with additional help from Watson, they instead made arrangements for Baba's stay at Harmon, writing to as many as 350 people about Meher Baba's visit and inviting them to visit the master. On 7 October 1931, Malcolm and Jean were waiting on the pier to welcome Thomas Watson and his wife from England. They went with them to their hotel, where Watson read to them and Mary Anton from his diary and spoke about their time at East Chalacombe. The Harmon Retreat was owned by a wealthy Broadway playwright, Margaret Mayo, 49.
Footnote, Malcolm and Jean had stayed in the Croton area previously, at which time they rented one of Margaret Mayo's other properties.
When
We
Margaret,
couldn't hear Marvin, can you say that? You broke up.
Okay. Malcolm and Jean stayed in the Croton area previously, at which time they rented one of Margaret Mayo's other properties.
when Margaret learned why Malcolm and Jean wished to rent it, she donated it for Baba's use. That the large, secluded, 4-bedroom stone house with red window frames was situated at 180 Old Albany Post Road, South, in a wooded area along the east side of the Croton River. Baba's room, the master bedroom on the second floor, stretched the length of the house on the river side. Sounds nice. With a deck from which he could look out through the treetops. Jean was waiting at Harmon to welcome Baba, and Meredith introduced them. "I am so happy you have come," she said. "I'm happy to be here," Baba warmly stated as he embraced her. Jean led Baba through the house to his room. Looking at her bandaged finger, he asked what happened. She replied that it was a slight cut. Baba gestured to her, "It'll be all right tomorrow." By the next morning, the cut had healed completely. On one occasion, Jean recounted, "My most outstanding impression of the first meeting with Baba is one of peering into bottomless pools of love and tenderness as my eyes met his. My heart pounded tremendously with excitement, and for a while I could not speak. I felt that in an inexplicable way, he was the reason for my very existence. That I had never really lived until this moment. That he was deeply familiar and precious to me, even as I was no stranger and very dear to him." At dinner that first evening, the few people present were wonderstruck being in the master's presence. Baba sat at the head of the table in the soft glow of the candlelight. Malcolm described him as looking for all the world like a Rembrandt painting of Jesus come to life. The next morning at 11 o'clock, Baba asked Jean in detail about the Harmon house, and she placed before him all the difficulties they had passed through planning his stay. But she was determined that the work be carried on despite setbacks. "Don't worry," Baba reassured her. "Everything will be all right. I am pleased with you, and I will help you spiritually." Jean was clever and would think things through before doing anything. But Baba further explained to her, "It is good to use discretion in all things. But before coming to any decisions, give more importance to the heart than the head. The judgment of the heart should be given preference, Your heart is good, and you are always eager to help others. You will be able to do everything much better after receiving light from me.
All right, thanks, Gene. Elizabeth, would you like to read?
Sure. Malcolm, who was in the habit of rising in the morning to meditate and do breathing exercises, gave up his daily routine and went out to the nearby town of Croton-on-Hudson to shop for provisions for the guest. That morning, when he returned, he found his wife Jean in tears. "I am not crying," she stammered. "That is, not in the usual sense of the word. I've just had my first interview with Baba, and he asked me to be silent with him a few minutes. I can't describe what happened in words. You'll see for yourself. Baba stirred something so deep inside me that I suddenly found myself weeping for no apparent reason, weeping tears of joy, of ecstasy, but you will experience it yourself." Jean told Malcolm that Baba had called for them both, and she had explained that Malcolm had gone shopping. Baba expressed that he was not at all pleased by Malcolm's initiative, whereby Chanji explained that one must first consult the master before doing anything. It was Jean and Malcolm's first lesson in how to please the master. As Malcolm was chopping wood in the late afternoon, Baba strolled by with Chanji, Meredith, and Ali, and he joined them for a walk through the woods. The sun was setting, and the still blue river and the dark green cypresses were breathtaking in the master's presence. Stopping for a moment, Baba took out his board, turned to Malcolm, and spelled, "I am God." "I know," Malcolm quietly replied. "I am the Ancient One," Baba spelled out. He pointed to the sky blazing with color and motion. "All this is illusion. Everything is within you." Malcolm had told Baba that he had had several inner experiences which led him to agree. Baba gestured. "Those were glimpses. You must make them permanent. I will help you." Several people were staying at the Harmon Retreat and also in other accommodations nearby. One couple was Max Wardall and his wife Lillian, who had met Baba at the docks. Max, 52, was an attorney who had a deep inclination for the spiritual path and had written several articles and books on Eastern thought. During their initial meeting, Baba gently took Max's hand and pressed it for a while. He then asked how Max felt. "I feel that I am one with the universe," he responded. "I see my father and mother and all people I know in you. Everything is in you. Since your arrival, I feel so changed, so much better. Your presence is so comforting." On one occasion, Baba explained to Max, there are 4 states on the path. First, faith, then renunciation and experience. Fourth, regaining normal consciousness. The last state after realization involves duty for the universe, as Christ had. Max had been a regular contributor to the Theosophical Messenger magazine and had traveled throughout India with Krishnamurti, Annie Besant, and Charles Leadbeater. He asked Baba about Krishnamurti, and Baba commented, "He is not as advanced as some think. He does good and will come to me one day." Max replied, "Yes, he needs your help." "I will help him advance on the path," Baba assured him. When he was young, Krishnamurti had been acclaimed by the Theosophists to be the modern Messiah. However, he was not self-deluded and renounced all such divine claims. During September of 1931, Malcolm wrote to Krishnamurti, informing him of Baba's visit to America. Krishnamurti wrote back from Holland on 1st October, expressing his gratitude to Malcolm and that he would very much like to meet Meher Baba in America. He also conveyed his greetings to Baba. Kath Garner, 46, was staying at Harmon to cook and clean. A friend of hers named Alice Green of Boston also stayed for a week. Kath, Alice, and her husband Chester were associated with the Crotona Theosophy Institute in Ojai, California, the purpose of which was to study spiritual matters and give instruction in how to lead a simple life.
Footnote, Catherine Elizabeth Gardner was a theosophist, a member of the prominent Boston family, and the author of a booklet on nutrition titled Need We Grow Old? She later wrote articles for the American Theosophist magazine.
Their years of labor had borne little fruit, and Kath was in search of a guru to guide her. After being in Baba's presence, Kath exclaimed, "I was waiting for the master, and now I have found him." One day, explaining to Kath about leading a, quote, simple life, Baba observed, "People always make a mistake when they talk of leading a simple life. To live such a life is infinitely difficult. Outwardly, a person may wear plain garments and have a simple diet, but this is not living a simple life. The spiritual life is lived when a person is free of all desires, thus becoming completely open and guileless. What is the use of only outwardly living simply? The elaborate dress of desires and longings is there, side by side with a feasting ego. The real meaning of leading a simple life is to be totally desireless, and to become desireless is impossible without a feeling of love for God." A portrait painter named Julian Lamar, 38, was a close friend of Malcolm and Jean, and he was among those staying at Harmon. As soon as he saw Baba, he pronounced, "How radiant your eyes are! What a glow is on your face! How could this luster and glow be captured on film? A camera can never catch you. How could this luster and glow be captured in a photograph? Your photo will never reflect your true beauty. I would like to paint your portrait if you would consent to a sitting." Pointing to himself, Baba gestured, "This is not the original picture. My real portrait is something quite different, and to portray it accurately, you must wipe out your own image." Baba meant the annihilation of the limited ego mind. "This is beyond my understanding," confessed Lamar. "I can only paint you as I see you, but I need your consent." Baba gave him permission, and Lamar was pleased.
Footnote, Julian Lamar, 1893 to 1967, was a native of Augusta, Georgia. After studying art and then graduating from the West Point Military Academy, he became an artist and painted movie actors, politicians, surgeons, academians, socialites, and many other prominent figures, but made most of his income by painting portraits of children. Lamar did paint the portrait of Meher Baba that was completed by April 1932 and which now hangs at Baba's house on MEHER Spiritual Center in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
2 days passed before Baba began seeing a few outsiders on the 8th. On Monday, 9th November 1931, among the first of those he met were James Graham Phelps Stokes, of New York City, 59, and his wife, Lettice, 38. Malcolm and Jean had contacted many acquaintances who they thought would be interested in meeting Baba. Spencer Kellogg Jr., heir to the Kellogg fortune, was one of these. His secretary, Anne C. Clark, knew the Stokes family, and it was she who first told them about the Godman's coming to America.
Footnote. Neither Ann Clark nor Spencer Kellogg met Baba on his first visit to America in 1931.
Stokes had also been a regular customer at Malcolm and Jean's bookstore since 1927. Graham Stokes was an early idealistic social reformer, despite being the scion of one of New York's wealthiest and most socially prestigious banking families. He was a tall, slim, athletic, Lincoln-esque figure who had been married previously to a famous Jewish socialist and feminist named Rose Pastor. Stokes, a trained physician, was involved at the time with helping the poor and supported the early civil rights efforts of Booker T. Washington. He served on the board of the Tuskegee Institute with fellow philanthropist Andrew Carnegie, among others. Wow.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Ralph, would you like to read?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Looking for my glasses, but I don't see them. I believe I can see this text just fine. We're at the top of the page.
Yep.
Around 1905, Stokes developed an interest in Eastern thought and joined the American branch of the Vedanta Society.
Footnote, a leader in the movement who often wrote to Stokes remarked in 1906, "I almost believe you were a Hindu ascetic in your last incarnation, and you have been reincarnated in American flesh for some good work by the Lord's will for this country." That was Robert D. Reynolds, millionaire socialist and omnis Episcopalian. J.G. Phelps Stokes' political and spiritual search for the all-in. This was from Socialism and Christianity in early 20th century America. Okay, go ahead.
For 25 years, he held regular monthly gatherings at his home, where like-minded spiritual aspirants listened to a lecture and meditated. In 1926, Rabia Martin, the American representative of Inayat Khan, sent him advanced lessons of Sufism. We're still talking about Stokes here, right?
Right.
In 1941, Stokes had penned a foreword to a book of lectures, Pillars of Life, by Vishwanath Kaskar, in which he wrote, "The fundamental note sounded by all the great Eastern teachers is that life is one. Realization of this oneness marks the fulfillment of its purpose, the attainment of its goal." So he was deeply impressed with meeting Baba and invited him to stay at his house in Greenwich Village whenever Baba visited New York City. Baba accepted this offer. Another prominent visitor that day was Princess Norina Machiavelli, 51 years old, the Italian wife of Prince George Machiavelli, 46 age, a national hero of Georgia who had fought for his country after, after the Russian Revolution. In December 1923, the couple moved to America, where Norina performed on stage in New York, and George founded the Prince Machiavelli Perfume Company. As a young woman, Norina, using the stage name Maria Carmi, was chosen by the Austrian stage director Max Reinhardt to play the role of the Madonna in his pantomime play, The Miracle. Pantomime play, written by Norina's first husband, the German author Karl Vollmoller. The play was a phenomenal success, performed over 1,000 times, but no.
In 1911, C.B. Cochrane transformed the exhibition halls at Olympia in West London into a massive Gothic cathedral and mounted a huge medieval pageant called The Miracle. Vollmoller's story told of a nun who forsakes her vows to experience life in the world. After many adventures, she returns penitent to find that she has not been missed, as the statue of the Virgin Mary has come to life and taken her place. It called for over 2,000 costumes, 1,000 assorted actors and extras, a chorus of 500, 25 horses, and an orchestra of 200. The Times of London reviewer wrote, quote, "The Miracle is a work of art. London has never seen the like of it."
Norina, a Roman Catholic, even had an audience with the Pope in Rome in 1914. She also starred in more than 25 silent Italian films. In America, she continued to perform in a production of The Miracle. From this role, she developed a deep spiritual longing and became a seeker. You want a new reader?
You can finish the page, Ralph.
Norina was an old friend of Jean's. The day before Jean had left for Harmon to prepare for Baba's arrival, she had gone to see Norina at her apartment in New York. Norina candidly asked her, "Who is this master at whose feet you would worship?" Jean tried to explain to her about Baba and about Thomas Watson's profound experience with him in England, but Norina remained unconvinced. Norina asked Jean, "How can you worship at the feet of any man, even if he does call himself master?" Women like ourselves, who have had such deep inner experiences, don't need any man to show us the way to God. How can you allow yourself to be drawn into such foolishness?
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Mahu, pick it up, please.
Okay. Page 1308, year 1931. As Jean was leaving, Norina sarcastically remarked, "Well, darling, when your master arrives, I must meet him. I too would like to whip like dear old Watson." End quote. Jean's explanations had seemed odd to Norina, and she was amused, but also puzzled. 3 days after Baba's arrival, Norina phoned Jean at Harmon, saying, The strangest thing has been happening to me. From the moment Meher Baba landed in New York, I have been weeping continuously. You must arrange for me to see him. End quote. When Norina encountered Baba in Harman, tears of ecstasy rolled down her cheeks, and she totally forgot her princessly self. Her life became Baba's, and she dedicated herself completely at his feet. Later, describing that first meeting, she related, I doubted whether that experience of meeting Meher Baba can be expressed in words. I had heard about him, but I remained skeptical. I had followed teacher after teacher, and yet none of them could ever reassure me about the path. Eventually, I confessed to go with a friend to Harman.
Consented.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. I consented to go with a friend in Harman. I should wear my glasses. I entered the room in which Baba was sitting, surrounded by followers and disciples. That very moment, an experience began, full of wonder and beauty. Suddenly, I had to run across the room, and I found myself weeping on the floor at his feet. Weeping, weeping. Oh, how I was weeping. But I also began to laugh, and the streams running down my cheeks, and the outbursts of laughter became one. I was resting my head on Baba's hand, and my whole body was shaking with terrific sobs of liberation. Eventually, I quieted down. Baba then took my face between his hands and looked at me for a long time into one of my eyes, and then into the other, and then back into the first eye. Eventually, I quieted down. Eventually, I quieted down. Baba then took my face between his hands and looked at me for a long time. Oh, I'm sorry, I reread this again. I loved it so much. I'm reading it from my own book. Then he spoke to me via the alphabet board. His first words were, quote, I am man and woman and child. I am sexless, end quote. He then paused for a while, brought his face nearest to mine, and spelled out, quote, have no fear. An incredibly joy surged through me. I went into the next room and lay down on a sofa, weeping still with joy. Suddenly the door opened and Baba came in. I knew now that my whole life had no meaning if it were not dedicated to the perfect master. And so I said to him, Baba, please take me with you. He motioned, quote, it is yet too soon, end quote. I could have died with grief when I felt his words. Footnote. You want me to read it?
You can if you see it, sure.
Ram Lando, God is adventure. This is actually a reference. Ram,
Yeah,
Randu.
that's the book. Yeah, the
That's
book
the
where
book.
that quote came from. Go ahead.
Yeah, is in London, Ivor Nicholson and Watson, 1935, page 141. Yeah, the whole quote, right? As a child, Norina had had an experience of God. On one occasion, she recollected, quote, "Since my childhood, I knew of God. When I was 12, he came as Jesus Christ and spoke to me. He explained to me in words of sublime wisdom that this love which had begun to surge within me was an imperative for the fulfillment of the highest form of spiritual love. He spoke to me in the unforgettable words, quote, I am your first and last love, end quote. The significance of these words was fully realized by Norina when she met Meher Baba for the first time and recognized him as Christ personified. Without her ever mentioning his incident, Baba spelled out, quote, I was the one who came to you in the form of Christ to lead you toward the goal, end quote. From their very first meeting, the master established in Norina unconditional faith in him, which was to last a lifetime. Mary Anton, 50, was the author of a best-selling book, The Promised Land, and she was helping Jean with the household affairs at the retreat.
I'll read the footnote. Mary Anton knew Thomas Watson through her husband, the noted geologist Amadeus Grabeau, whom Watson had met years before when he enrolled in a class at MIT where Grabeau was a student. In 1917, Anton separated from her husband and Watson had given her financial and moral support. Go ahead.
When Mary, When Mary heard of Meher Baba from Milo, she wrote to Meredith.
Wait.
Milo.
I think you skipped
I'm sorry. I went to the second one.
You want-
Mary was a sincere, loving seeker. Let me read it from the beginning. Mary Anton, 50, was the author of a best-selling book, The Promised Land, and she was helping Jean with the household affairs at the retreat. Mary was a sincere, loving seeker who had previously suffered mentally for many years and had sought treatment at different sanitariums at the end of 1923. Quote, when I had been bitten to a pulp spiritually, I abandoned the doctors and entered on a life of prayer, end quote.
You know what? Finish the paragraph. Most of these.
When Mary, that is right. When Mary heard of Meher Baba from Milo, she wrote to Meredith and received an encouraging reply. During Baba's visit, she found herself unexplainably happy with tears streaming out of her eyes.
There was a footnote. It simply said, Alan Mazur, A Romance in Natural History, The Lives and Works of Amadeus Grabeau and Mary Anton. So it's a book about them.
Okay. One day, this is Mary Anton. One day she telephoned her 24-year-old daughter, Josephine Grabeau, to tell her that she too must meet Baba. Josephine had also had episodes of mental turmoil from being bipolar, for which she had been hospitalized a few years before. When Josephine was ushered into Baba's room on 10 November, she hesitated. Chanji told her not to be afraid. Baba held out his hand to her and she knelt at his feet. Quote, I was lost in his luminous brown eyes, end quote. She recalled, almost at once, I felt I knew him. Here was the living Christ. There was no doubt in my mind. Meeting Baba was also going to heaven and meeting God. He was gentle, kind, beautiful, holy, and most important, he was a natural. End quote. Page 1310, Baba motioned to her if she wished to ask anything. Josephine said that she would like to help people. Baba gently replied, quote, first you must learn how to help, end quote. Many years later, Josephine related, the thing that caught you most were those beautiful melting eyes that you could look into and just lose yourself completely. There was a sense of touch. There was a sense of such beauty and purity, an exalted feeling whenever you were near Baba. Even the whole house was filled with it. Beauty was the term that comes to my mind most in relation to Baba. It was beauty in its highest form. He seemed to radiate it. And of course, love. When I first met him, I knelt in front of him. He smiled and put his hand on my shoulder. His touch was so gentle, like the petal of a flower. I always had the feeling with Baba that he was not physical at all. He was just barely in the physical body. You weren't dealing with a human being. You were dealing with a spiritual being, temporarily in a physical body. Anything that was your highest aspiration seemed to be centered in him. Anything of the most beautiful, most pure, most holy that you ever imagined was in him and intensified, magnified, really. He was the center of all the highest things that you would ever thought of or ever experienced in any form. Such sweetness and gentleness and lovingness and beauty. Those were the things that I was most aware in Bob. Jo, refers to Josephine, as she was called, was allowed to stay at a Harmon retreat to assist her mother with chores. She was given a room in one of Margaret Mayo's other houses, near Mayo's own residence, which Margaret had agreed to make available to guests visiting Harmon. But the first night Jo was there, the house, but the first night Jo was there, the house caught fire at 1 a.m. and burned to the ground. There's a footnote.
Let's see what that footnote says. The house, known as the Hilltop Bungalow, was located across the river on Ridge Road, about 3 miles from the Harmon Retreat. The fire started when flying sparks from the chimney ignited the roof.
The visitors, however, were not upset, as it afforded them the opportunity to move into the house where Baba was staying. Thus, they were able to spend the night under the same roof with him. The next day, Wednesday, 11 November 1931, Baba called them to his room and asked if anyone were hurt. On being reassured that all were fine, Baba explained, quote, Fires often spring up where I go, end quote. Baba then went to inspect the smoldering ruin. He asked Jean, quote, will our hostess suffer financial loss? End quote. No, she replied. On the contrary, it so happens she is in a greater need of the money than of the guest house and will benefit by the amount the insurance company will pay her. End quote. Baba was satisfied, then responded, quote, since no one will suffer severely through this experience, we should rejoice that the fire happened. It is a good sign. Those who lost their few belongings in the fire will begin a new life. Those who manage to save their possessions will have to wait for their new beginnings. Anchor. Some of the guests had lost money in the fire, and Baba remarked to them, quote, Christ asked much more than this. To those who came to him, he said, leave all and follow me. End quote. A successful novelist and a screenwriter named Pirlipur Shihan, 56, met Baba on the tent, and 6 persons came to meet him the following day. Among them was Norina, who brought a young woman named Anita Dikara. There's a footnote. Yeah.
All right. Anita later married Raja Villard.
Yes. Anita was a talented art student in whom Norina had taken an interest and was helping financially. On one occasion, Anita recalled her first encounter with Meher Baba. I had been brought up Catholic, knowing I was about to see him. Knowing I was about to see him, all of a sudden, I was frightened. I thought, if this is such a great religious man, how am I to behave? I can't shake hands with him. The only thing to do is kneel. I'll make the sign of the cross and say, bless me, Father, and kiss his hand.
Finish this part, Mahu.
Sure. My heart was pounding. My heart was pounding with fear. This is Anita. The door opened. Baba was seated Persian fashion with his legs crossed under him. I looked at him and I went into peals of laughter. I laughed and threw myself on him. Quote, my heavens, it's you, I cried. You made me go through all this masquerading and fear when it's you. It's incredible. And I laughed and laughed. Baba opened up his arms. I was absolutely enraptured and felt a tremendous sense of joy. My whole being felt as if I was in a furnace. Words cannot describe the encounter. It was like meeting someone I always knew, as though I had come to my real home. I experienced a great beauty and great joy. End quote.
Thank you, Mahu. Okay, I think we can.
Can we finish that part about Anita?
Yeah, there is
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll read a little more. Eugene, why don't you go ahead and read the rest of this page?
At their first meeting, Baba asked Anita, "Do you know who I am?" She replied, "You are the source of all goodness." Norina had explained much to her about Baba, and Anita continued, "I wanted to ask you so many things I had thought of, but when I am near you, I just can't, and there seems no necessity to." Baba replied, "Yes, I could explain for hours, but words and explanations are not necessary for one who feels things deeply as you do." Baba inquired about her interests, and when she said she was an artist, he gestured humorously. "Could you paint me?" She answered, "You are too beautiful and would be too difficult to paint." Nonetheless, 2 days later, Anita returned to Harmon with Norina, and again on the 18th, and at Baba's request, attempted to paint his face. Despite several sittings, Anita found that Baba's expression kept changing, and she left the canvas unfinished.
And the footnote says the portrait is kept in the MEHER Spiritual Center archives in Myrtle Beach.
I'd love to see that.
Mhm.
Anita later recollected about that incident. "I hadn't really studied portrait painting, but Baba guided me to it. Painting him was a great experience because I learned one cannot put down that which is ever changing. It would take pages to describe the event of being in Baba's presence while I painted. I cannot tell you how long it took because there was no sense of time in his presence. Baba looked at me and I lost all sense of time. Everything about him was ever changing. Baba's eyes, the color of his skin, his expressions. It remains a great mystery to me." I told Baba, "One cannot paint you because your expression changes every moment. You are never the same."
Thanks, Gene. Let me take a page here. Baba laughed and commented, "Yes, you are right. I am ever changing." I realized after a long time what he meant by ever changing, for it is life itself, the divine play. On another occasion, Baba remarked to the group at Harmony, "I am eternally happy." Anita interjected, "Oh, you needn't tell us that. You must be with this face of yours. What bliss. Look at his eyes. They speak more than words. So radiant, so penetrating. How understanding and compassionate. Without a doubt, you look eternally happy." Anita was a welcome addition to the group because her lively nature kept Baba entertained. Visitors to Harmon on Thursday, 12 November 1931, included Louise Skay, the young Canadian girl from the Roma, a trance medium, an author named Nancy Fullwood, who had experiences similar to Edgar Cayce, and another psychic, theosophist, Dora Van Gelder Kuntz, 27. A well-known nutritionist, Norman Walker, 45, met Baba on the 13th, as did Dorothy Louise Norris and Mrs. Percy Stewart. Footnote here says, Norman Walker wrote many books on the benefits of a raw food diet and invented a popular juicer. Dora's husband, Fritz Kuntz, was a close associate of Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater. He also associated with the Crotona Institute with Catherine Gardner and others. Dorothy Norris was the daughter of a wealthy stockbroker, Alfred E. Norris. Mrs. Percy Stewart was also well off, as she donated $1,000 towards Baba's cause, much more than anyone else at the time. Baba saw 9 more visitors at Harmon the next day. Among them was Kitty's younger sister, Angela Lambert, who had missed seeing Baba in London. Henry Steigner also met Baba that day, and we have a footnote. Henry Steigner delivered lectures at Hyperion House in New York City on practical mysticism. The talks were later published as Mysticism in Action in 1941. Steigner noted man's greater journey is the quest within. On Sunday, 15 November 1931, Baba was driven to Manhattan concerning travel documents for his return to Europe and India. He stopped first at the home of the president of City College, New York, Dr. Frederick B. Robinson, at 280 Convent Avenue, where he met with several new people. We'll check that footnote in a minute. He then went to stay for 2 days at the Stokes' residence on 88 Grove Street. Among those he saw in New York were Milo Shattuck, Grace Mann, Julian Lamar, and Anita, and her mother, Jacqueline DeCaro, a strict Catholic who nonetheless felt something special when she saw Baba in person. And that footnote was Dr. Robinson had written a preface for one of Swami Yogananda's books, Songs of the Soul. His wife, Julia, had driven to Harmon and met Baba the week before on 8th November. Anita's mother was quite ill and had been afraid of death, but she later told her daughter, "Since I met Baba, I realized what the spirit is." And Anita wrote to Baba, "The spiritual change in my mother is amazing. Your name is always on her lips and your photograph is always on her pillow." Kitty had written Chanji about 2 close musician friends of hers and Herbert's in New York named Miss Valentine and David Sherry. Both met Baba while he was in the city. And this comes to the close of our reading today. We will pick up at page 1313 next week. And we will stop this.
Sounds auspicious. 1313.
Yeah. What a beautiful